we get going. The Unitive Cluster is focused on unity, and it's grounded in advances in science that confirm the holistic integrity of life on Earth. This emergent understanding of the unitive nature of all beings, which is coherent with indigenous wisdom and most religious and spiritual teachings, provides fundamentally new ground for leveraging the reality of our global interdependencies. And it also lays very different ground for accelerating progress on the SDGs. As a cluster, we aim to provide a unitive context for the cross-cutting issues that reflect the integration, the intersectionality, the indivisibility, and the interlinkages of not only the SDGs, but of all species. So today we've invited you not to a program that we're delivering, but to a dialogue that we want you to be included in. And that dialogue is with our very special guest, Dr. Youssef Mahmoud. Dr. Mahmoud is Senior Advisor at the International Peace Institute and is a former UN Undersecretary General. He's headed peace operations in Burundi, the Central African Republic, and Chad, and was UN Resident Coordinator in Guyana and Director of the Department of Political Affairs at UN headquarters in New York. Dr. Mahmoud served as a member of the UN Secretary General's high levels independent panel on peace operations and on high-level advisory group for the Global Study on Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. So quite the expert. Before we launch into the dialogue, I want to set some context. And before that, I have a question for you. And Tara, if we can put everybody on full screen on gallery view. Raise your hand, use the hand raising if you are frustrated by the CSW political declaration, or if you find that it is not as impressive as you would have hoped. Can you use your hand raising? I see a live hand raised. Use the hand raising feature, please. I see a few. So, many people are responding that there was a lot of crazy politics at the end of getting this resolution signed and that it doesn't hit the mark. And why do you think that is? Why do you think that happened? And you can put your thoughts in the chat about that. How strong do you think that is on a scale of 1 to 5? How strong do you think that declaration is? Just put a number in the chat. So both the CSW 2025 political declaration and the UN Women's Report called the Women's Rights in Review 30 years after Beijing make it very clear that we know what to do. And we know that more and more workplaces and more political entities are doing many of those things. But still progress is really questionable. The Unitive Cluster submits that lack of progress indicates the need to work from a more comprehensive and a more unitive perspective. So we get solutions like fight against poverty, tackle challenges, but we have to transcend that kind of mindset because tackling it, fighting something, just give credence to the thing that you're fighting, and then that becomes the defining mechanism. And so then we don't get the possibility of all possibility, all the other possibilities than just fighting something. If I'm fighting my notebook and pushing against it, all of the field gets defined by my notebook, where the rest of the universe of all possibility is out there, but we're missing it because we're focused on that one thing we're fighting and tackling. And so that kind of mindset is something that we want to transcend, at least for this session and maybe ongoingly in terms of our approaches to the issues of CSW. We can't keep chasing symptoms. We just can't. And that's why we're asking much deeper questions in this session. We're asking what conditions root these problems? What are the deeper roots? We've been trying to bandage our wounds from systems based on norms that include endemic wounding. And so it becomes very circular. So our task today is to search our hearts and minds for the norms we truly, deeply want. Einstein told us we can't fix problems from within the same system that created them. And so we're asking today, how do we stop bandaging the wounds? How do we stop focusing on solutions and patches and fixes to moving into something that's much more that's a much deeper solution. And I want to show you just this one slide from the report. This is the Women's Rights Report. And it just has a couple of things that I'd like to bring to your attention. It really does recommend that we go to these, looking at the deeply embedded structures that what sustains these gaps is what's deeply entrenched in gender inequality. What are discriminatory norms that, norms are like the water we swim in. We don't think of it. But it's like the culture in a lab dish. It'll grow some things and they won't grow others. And so these norms that make up our culture, we tend to think of those as not a place to work because they're intangible and they're hard to address. And so we start putting patches and trying to fix systems where what we really need is a global just transition and toward a blue and green economy. We need to design systems that transform social norms. And that's really where we want to come from today. We want to move away from that kind of thinking and move into a deeper addressing of this. So we believe that the reason we're failing to meet Beijing standards is that it just isn't, they don't go deep enough. They don't address the causal factors. Some of the remedies that the year in review report recommends are shock proofing. Well, if cultural norms include a lot of shocks to human rights, then shock proofing becomes a big circular conversation. And then it's not protective in the long run, which is what this is aiming to do, is protect. But if you have to keep protecting people from a system, then you have to look deeper at what is the system that endangers those people and not stop doing the fixes, because out of compassion, we need to keep fixing problems where people are suffering. But we also have to prioritize working at this other level. We have it in our capacity to create a culture of peace. A culture that simply doesn't include endemic shocking of people or leaving anybody unprotected or behind, leaving no one behind. Who are we that there's such a thing as behind? If you went to an indigenous population and talked to them about anyone being left behind, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. There's no such thing as behind in those kinds of cultures, and those are the kinds of things we can learn from our indigenous friends. There's also a kind of a mindset about building peace from the ground up. Well, yes, we do need the grassroots work, but it's totally unrealistic to leave it there. These grassroots organizations are completely tapped out. As you know, most of you represent them, and there's not enough money to even do what you're trying to do at the grassroots level, let alone change the whole world. It has to be about that. It has to work at the grassroots, but we also have to really put attention at this larger, harder to address, a systemic level. So we need to reframe the bases that we're working from. And so for this session, we're going to move beyond the conversation about solutions and fixing things, move beyond the fix-it approach because it's just too superficial. We can't put band-aids on wounds anymore and think that that's going to do the work. Have to move away from systemic norms to perpetuate ongoing wounding. We have to move away from stopgap projects and thinking that those are enough. We have to move into the fundamental drivers of our problems and the fundamental drivers of making cultures whole and compassionate and just. And so we're going to work at the deeper ground of culture and consciousness today. And our plan for this session is to kind of flip the switch. We want to start from the future. We want to ask you, what would it look like to have a world where gender equity is a natural expression of cultural norms? We want to ask you, what would it take to build a culture that's conducive to everyone living in accordance with the Declaration of Human Rights, knowing that gender rights are human rights? So we're going to ask you to use the hand raising and to really participate, because that's what this is. This is a participative session. We want to start with the question of what if men and women were seen as a unified whole? What if we just had gender norms, where everyone was equal, where everyone had human rights, what would it look like? What kind of future would that be? And dream big in your answer to these questions. Raise your hand and start chiming in here. Scott said blue, green, and caring could start with deep listening. There would be deep listening. What else? I encourage everyone to turn on your cameras. Fatima, 50 and 50 in life. Folks, we do want to have a dialogue, and it does help to see your face. So please turn on your camera, if at all possible. 50-50 in life. What else? What would that look like? Fatima, can you turn on your camera and tell us what would that look like? Tara, can you highlight Fatima, please?
Yes, and also if you can't turn on your camera, you can absolutely turn on your microphone.
You can, but leave that on mute until you're ready to speak, please. I turn
Sorry,
on
this is
my camera. Okay. Uh, Nancy, do you have something to say? I would love to hear from you. Go ahead and speak.
oh sorry, I can't open my camera right now. Yeah, one of my I've been working for 40 years to train women to be able to protect and defend themselves. I think one of the biggest problems amongst the fact that, we can't go to schooling as much. I understand all the concept of that, but once somebody gets on your body and has power over your body, it becomes another discussion, totally another type of conflict. I strongly believe that if women could protect and defend themselves, not only emotionally, psychologically, but also physically, I think it would be a different world. But somehow it's still a taboo subject. And I've experienced it this week too, when I would ask panels about what's their perspective on this subject, and I wouldn't get answers. And I've been told when I would go back to meet with them because they didn't answer my question, it's a very controversial subject. That's what I'm told. So that's what
So
I bring to
Nancy,
the table this
you're
morning.
speaking to exactly why we wanted to flip the switch here and not start working on solutions in this session. We're just going to suspend that thinking. It's important work to work on solutions. It's not to say not to do it, but we want for this hour and a half to really focus on what would it look like if your work was obsolete? What if we no longer needed you to advocate for that because that problem was handled? What would that look like? That's what we're trying to move into for this moment in this session is what would it look like? Let's start with the future we want rather than fixing the now that we have. Let's situate. What would it look like to have a world where all people, regardless of gender, enjoy human rights? David.
Good morning. Hello, everybody. Um, well, clearly, the issue is mindset. The issue is how we perceive how, our thinking. And we, are based on the dysfunctional thinking that has been generational. But how would it be? It would be that there would not be an issue of difference of the higher or lower, but it is that we are the co-equal. We work, it's being people together, humans together, and embracing the gifts that every person has. And gender is not an issue. Um, and it certainly can be done, but it is the moving beyond the current mindset that is enforced in so many ways. And so it really is, I think it's also, one of, well, that you get into a solution, but anyhow, that's what I would say.
Thank you. Mindset, a really big area that we're working on, consciousness and mindset Consciousness is the domain of causality. Every social crisis is first and foremost a crisis of consciousness. Kandima, can you mute your mic, please? Tara, can you mute a few people? Yes. So, and I'm looking at the chat. 50-50 from Fatima includes everybody having 50-50 responsibilities in the job and the workforce, and at home with children, caring emotionally. Sabita, a world free from poverty. Sabita, do you want to speak to that?
I feel that when we get to that point where we are operating from our inner truth and our higher principles, and I stay true to that, then I will look upon the other in a similar light. And my natural tendency would be to uphold their dignity because I'm doing the same for myself. So it's not that we have to work towards this or work hard for it. It will be a natural thing. And because of that, there will be that sharing. So there's no question of poverty and hunger. Education for all. It would be a natural flow of energy that would take place. So I find that that egoistic nature will be very subdued, and instead we'll be operating from a higher place within.
Thank you. Yes, consciousness again. Again, folks, welcome to the new people. And we ask everyone, turn on your camera. We'd love to see you. Tez, what do you have to say?
Yes, thank you. I just feel that while I want to avoid gross generalizations and sex role stereotypes, when we are all empowered versus a few, that women have many qualities to bring to the world that haven't currently been honored, valued, respected, and incorporated into our work. As a peace builder, one example of that is that as mothers with sons, we wouldn't want our sons to go to war. I mean, we know that heartbreak of losing our children. And historically, women have been the peace builders. They often haven't been recognized or haven't been involved in the decisions. But I believe we'd have a world that better expresses compassion, better expresses peace and love when we unleash the power of women and women's voices, particularly in decision making. So,
Thank you. Any other thoughts? What would a future look like that had gender equity? What if human rights were everybody's rights? What if the binary gender norms no longer constrained us? What would the world look like? Bonita.
Yes, thank you. And I'm a specialist on understanding gender differences and particularly naming the competencies that women bring to the workplace and to the world. And it's kind of an extension of the last conversation, but particularly bring language to these competencies. I highlight using the word fire preventer. In the United States, we often honor the firefighters as great leaders. And then the fire preventers are not recognized because they don't operate in the same way. They see a larger context, a systems way of thinking, and also foresight for what is happening and what could happen. And to be able to name that competency is very important, because I've actually had executives tell me that women aren't ready to be promoted because they're scattered and all over the place. And no, that has to be recontextualized. That that's a high context way of seeing things, connecting the dots, including relationships.
Sorry, I muted you by mistake. There you go.
Okay. Did you hear any of what I said?
Yes, we just missed a couple seconds there, so we heard everything.
All right, great. Well, other elements, other descriptions, for instance, the practice of devil's advocate in the workplace and in the home is usually bulletproofing an idea by showing the weaknesses of it, criticizing it, being able to be critical of it. And women and more relational people, we don't want to just be critical. In fact, I've had women say that they've left their companies and left engineering because of devil's advocate. But I like to point out there's angel's advocate that relational people like to play. We like to build ideas and connect in collaboration.
So in an ideal world, I need to move this along. Thank you. That was really valuable. In an ideal world, we have angel advocates. And right. I love that concept.
Right. And I have a whole range of those competencies that I'd love to share at some point, but I know it's not appropriate now. Thank you.
So, I encourage you to really stay in this vein, because especially those of us who are representing NGOs who are working at solving problems, we tend to stay in that solution mindset. And in so many ways, it just puts a finger in the dam of a problem where another leak is going to sprout, because we can't fix it that way. And so, Youssef, I'd like to turn the floor over to you to talk about some of the assumptions and norms that get in our way.
Thank you very much. Sorry for my voice. I'm nursing a cold, but the worst is over. I think what Joni was inviting us to do is a particular way of being rather than doing. And starting with the future is one way of doing that. Because the system is so powerful that we never question what we take for granted. So one way of liberating ourselves so we can think of the futures without being incarcerated by the present is to think of a few norms that bind us to a sick present, a sick but very dominant and hegemonic present. So I'm just going to take one or two norms or ideas and would invite you to think of other norms that tie us or tether us to a particular way of knowing and doing. So if you take the word, for example, that is often bandied around, the word inclusive, inclusiveness. So when you think about it, inclusive into what? Into what system? What type of political and economic system you are trying to include women? Who defined that system? What structures define that system to which you kindly would like to invite women? So we often talk, for example, about inclusive processes. So we ask women to pull a chair to a negotiation table that's already set, usually by men. So when you say inclusiveness, what is it that you're trying? You basically have been co-opted by a system dominated by a particular mindset. So we need to revisit some of the assumptions that have informed some of these solutionism or imaginaries that have incarcerated our mind. Similarly, when we talk about climate or nature or environment, now we talk about environment as if it is something outside us. We talk about environmental consciousness or environment sensitivity and so on, all those words that you have heard. So what does that mean, environment? As if it is, or when we talk about climate change, climate changes. What do you expect? Or nature just outside us. We need to query, we need to question. And we would think differently if we are become aware that nature is us. Whereas we tend to be co-opted by the system when we say climate change, divorcing it from the economic and political human actions that made climate not just change, but retaliate in many lethal ways and pay us back for the suicidal relationship we've entertained with it for centuries, because we have maintained the extractive economic systems that makes it, quote, change, and we become part of the integrated in the machinery of solutionism, how to solve the problem of climate change. So the idea, therefore, of starting from the futures and walking back is not to predict what it looked like, it's just to free us. It's just to free us from the moorings that have been imposed upon us. Let me take one last example, and I'd love to hear other examples. And particularly if you look at the declaration that has been adopted, we talk about peace. And peace has often been construed as the absence of violence. It's just like saying, I am healthy because I am free of diseases. In other words, the negative defines the holistic aspect of peace. Peace is about relations. How can we continue to work together as men and women to face the unpredictable future that is waiting to come if we go and envision that future as separate, as men and women, as unequal entities, as parts of this unified whole? There is no way. So unless we are moving as a unified whole, that future will continue to escape us, and we will continue to fix what is wrong instead of drawing on what is strong when we are unified. And you can continue all kind of elements that you can question. Take leadership. We've often confused leadership with leaders. And we forget leadership is about the ship in leadership. Actually, it's about co-leadership. So that's what I would like us to sort of engage in, is what are some of the fundamental, dominant, hegemonic, often Eurocentric assumptions that have informed our dominant understanding of a particular norms, of particular words, and how we can revisit them and free ourselves from those assumptions in order to freely we can imagine the futures that are awaiting to emerge. And so when Joni asked you that question, what if men and women were seen as unified whole? It invites us to rethink the binary gender norms, the binary gender roles. And so it's an invitation to dream, in a sense, of a world where binary gender norms no longer constrain us, as she said. It reminds me of this philosopher by the name of Frank White. He's a space philosopher, and he has coined the term the overview effect to describe the profound cognitive shifts experienced by astronauts when viewing Earth from space. So it's a transformative perspective that sees our planet as a unified whole without borders. And this has profound implications how we understand ourselves and our place in that world without borders. In Africa, it is called a world without wounds, because it was self-inflicted or inflicted by others for control purposes. So that's the invitation we are asking you. It's to start from the whole and go back to the present and say, what is I need to do in the present so I can think from a holistic point of view? And what I was suggesting, and other people have suggested, is question, query, interrogate some of the assumptions that have imprisoned our thinking. So what I would like to invite is, can you think of other norms whose assumptions have imprisoned us in solutionism? And then we will go to the next question and say, do you see some indications, some changes that are gesturing to that future that we can harness, some indications of transformation in the present that we can harness for inviting that unitive future, that unitive consciousness? So these are the two questions for you. One is, are there norms, particularly in the declaration that was just adopted, that you think could benefit from questioning? And second is, do you see transformative changes in gender equality that are happening that could be harnessed and that could help us invite that unitive future to the present? Thank you.
Jude.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Youssef, and everyone. One of the norms that came to me, Youssef, as you were speaking, is the assumption that vulnerability is weakness. And I know from my own experience that when I'm willing to be vulnerable, that's actually my greatest strength. And so by questioning that correlation of vulnerability, i.e. openness, trust, with weakness, and given the mechanistic separatist worldview we have, equating then weakness with fear, with it's to be feared. So how do we reframe our human vulnerability as actually a strength? And therefore, when we have that unity and diversity and willing to step into the circle of our collective and individual vulnerability, how can we gain strength together from that? So that's both an assumption that I would question, and it's also perhaps one of the steps that helps to move us from that sense of fear into a welcoming, into the remembering, as you say, and Joni's saying, we're all saying that unity is our existential reality. So that's just one thought for us.
Yes, divorcing that idea that the feminine is the weak.
Exactly.
You know, there's an assumption that we've made that really has gotten us into a tremendous amount of trouble.
Exactly. And as you say, Joni, the sense is that it's vulnerability is a feminine attribute. It's a human attribute.
The human attribute.
It's a human attribute, and it's an important attribute. And it actually is one that I think from an evolutionary perspective has been key to our socialization. When we include and embrace that vulnerability in community, it actually strengthens the community.
Yes. Other thoughts, folks? This is a dialogical session. This is not a presentation session. We're counting on you to be part of this session, truly part of it. So please turn on your cameras and raise your hands. We want to hear. Tez.
There we are. Yes, I loved what Jude had to say, of course, because, of course, any kind of emotionality, which is also human, is often attributed to the feminine. And so, what I did wish to say, and for me, this is the big overarching kind of assumption, is that we are all separate. And we are separate from each other. We're separate from other sentient beings. We are separate from the planet herself. And I think that we need to question that assumption. We all know that science, as well as indigenous wisdom and spirituality, tells us that we aren't separate. We've never been separate. And it's time for us to truly question that assumption. If we can shift that into what we know, as Jude and Joni have said, that unity is our existential reality, then all else dissolves. All of the other world's problems dissolve. So thank you.
Thank you. Kandima, I hope I say your name right. Can you turn on your camera? Let's hear from you and your mic. Hi. We need your mic on.
Myself.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I am Sakindema. I work for Campaign for Good Governance based in Freetown, Sierra Leone. So for me, just taking on from the previous speakers, I would see that we have to give it, we have to look at some of these gender norms as from the conspiracy perspective and see how we can give it critical thinking, because it's one of the way through which we can address issues of inequality. You see, there have been these traditional roles, especially in some of these underdeveloped countries, that will say, okay, men are, for instance, are the breadwinners, where women are caregivers. Some of these norms, some of these theories have emerged from, have been transferred from generations, believing that this is how it is and it has to be accepted. So we have to see these narratives and see how best at this we can change these narratives so that current generations will believe that no, that's not the situation. And we shouldn't believe in some of these gender norms to say to see men as the breadwinners and women as the caregivers. Rather, see the either sex as partners in development, as people who can sort of promote equality in our homes. And also, I think in most areas, you will see people who say STEM is for men, caregiving profession are for women. Who says that? So we have to give a critical thinking to some of these ideas most of these conspiracies, most of these norms have been there as a way of promoting the men's agenda and getting women where they are today. And we've seen that for years, for centuries, this has existed and has been no progress. So for the future, we have to start with critical thinking. Critical thinking is one of the ways through which we can sort of address these things and really look into some of these conspiracies and see these conspiracies as deliberate efforts by this society to keep women where they are and men keep promoting men as such. So I think these are the two submissions I want to make here. That yes, we can achieve the future gender equality, and we can best achieve it if we give critical thinking to current norms and see how we can change the perception and do robust education to say that's not true and this is the right way, and have boys and girls, men and women growing together, believing that they can be as one and they can contribute the same.
Thank you. Yes. Perspective, mindset, consciousness. Yes. Yes. History. So much defines us. Who else?
I'm going to share some of the dialogue going on in the chat. Thank you for sharing for those who can't turn on their mics. So Susanna said that living in the awareness and articulation of one earth community, that is being and aware and intentional and caring for other people in the earth, nature with love, care, and compassion. We also have in the chat Bonita, who said, we have been imprisoned in firefighting when we can bring fire prevention forethought and whole systems thinking along the Angels Advocate collaboration, able to include critical thinking without it, predominating as devil's advocate. And Bonita also shared, when I heard an Indigenous leader mention, for us, nature is family, I found a tear dropping from my eye. This whole system way of thinking is precious. And thank you for sharing in the chat. And if you guys have anything else to share, we'll share it out loud as well.
Thank you. And so what are some of the norms that keep us from having that kind of future? What are some of the norms that we just take for granted?
I think one norm that currently exists and that has existed for a long time is the traditional woman as the homemaker. And for a lot of women who are in careers and who have entered the workforce, that role as a homemaker still exists. So women also carry the burden in a traditional household of working and providing for the housework, when just less than 100 years ago in the United States, that wasn't the case. They would stay home, provide for the home, and not enter the workforce, like prior to World War II and World War I. So I think recognizing and appreciating the role of women who are homemakers and who do provide childcare and who make the house a home is so important, because that has often been overlooked when it is a foundation for all career individuals in the family.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Adding to what she has mentioned, another one could be you have these sexual and relationship expectations in homes, wherein it is believed in most typical homes that men should be dominant and women should be submissive. That keeps going on. And that is why sometimes you will see act like a man. And if a boy cries, you will hear people say, you are crying like a woman, or you are crying like a girl. And so you see this dominance nature that is being accorded to men and to boys in homes. So this has subconsciously been built in women and girls, believing that it's only the men, it's only the boys that should be dominant in whatever setting they get. So that is why in most communities you will see that even when it comes to politics, even when it comes to speaking, even when it comes to decision making, even when the woman or the girl is so competent to do it, because he or she believes or comes from a home that believes that it's men's business, it's boys' business, they will rather keep mute and allow the boy and allow the girl to take dominance. But I think this dominance expectation, this dominance theory, it's something that we need to look at. And also, we have to see how best at least we can sort of address some of these things as well.
Thank you.
To add to that, I think that's a great point that our language forms our norms, right? It's the way we speak influences how we think about things. And it's so simple, but we really don't put a lot of thought into it. So thank you for sharing that. When we say things like you play like a girl or run like a girl, we really do enforce that women are inferior, and that simply isn't true.
So if we are truly one, which Jude Currivan, who spoke earlier, she is a renowned cosmologist who has demonstrated the science of our unity. She's demonstrated that unity is not some utopian dream, and it is our existential reality. And if that's true, what do we have to let go of to live that way? Not if that's true, that is what we know scientifically to be true. That reality just has not moved to underpin our policies and practices yet. And so that's what we're doing in this discussion today, is looking at what do we have to let go of? Youssef, do you want to frame that in your thinking? Oh, the mic is muted.
I apologize. I could keep moving depending on the whims of the internet. So you might find me with cats in a minute. No, I think the discussion so far has really illustrated what we need, forgive me, what we need to let go of in order to let come. And there were excellent examples. From what I have heard, it reminded me of, forgot the quote by whom, but basically this woman leader said that in the future there will be no female leaders. They will just be leaders. So this idea of dichotomy that that the leaders, that the future of leadership is feminine, or it will be common co-leadership going forward. And so what I would like to invite our participants who have, in light of all these examples of what we need to get rid of, is to identify key developments, key transformative innovations, or key innovative thinkings that or policies that you are witnessing, that you know of, that you are experiencing, that are gesturing us to that unitive future, whether of a humanity as one unity, or of nature and humanity being one. If you could perhaps signal or identify or share with us these indications that we can readily harness as to take us to that unified future that we started with.
Okay.
Lasinka, you can feel free to unmute if you'd like to share.
Okay, thank you. Yes. I think that there's something to consider before that. As a woman, I have found it's an inner dynamic. It's not so much a question of policies or things of that nature. To give you an example, as a woman and many people here, I've sort of achieved certain steps in my development, a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD. And each of those steps, I was married or in association with men. And it was almost a physical impossibility for me to complete that degree when it meant that I was going beyond and moving beyond my husband. And what would happen is I would completely blank out. I wouldn't be able to think. I wouldn't be able to put things. It was it was a complete impossibility, and it took me a huge amount of inner work to be able to actually reach my PhD, meaning that I was, moving above the men in my life. And it's much worse. It's much more deeply seated than just rules and regulations on the outside. This goes very deeply because I came from a family of very, very out there women. My grandmother was a women's liberal, etc., and nobody ever decided that women should be inferior to men, and I was brought up that way. But it was a societal thing inside of me. There was this battle between me, the best possible wife, the best possible woman who stands behind the man, and me, the woman who has her natural desire to grow and to develop, and a tremendous urge to do that. And that caused psychological problems that made it very, very, very hard for me to move ahead in my life.
Thank you. And that's why the Unitive Cluster addresses consciousness and mindset, and why we feel that is the most critical domain of work, because all stems from that. Thank you, Lysinka, for taking us into that territory. David Wick.
Well, I think something that we have now talked about, which is huge, huge, is that women give birth. We all are, come from mothers. And I think that's a societal perspective, and also um, keeps women at a lower level because, oh, well, she's going to leave the job and have to go and raise children. And, oh, well, I mean, so that's a big one that I think is deeply embedded in our culture. And how to deal with that is huge. I think it largely is unspoken, but it has a major impact, I think, on the status of men and women together.
Thank you. Tez.
Hi, Tez, you can unmute yourself to share. Thank you.
Thank you. A little more challenging with the phone. Thank you. So to piggyback on both what David shared and what Lysinka shared, I would say that the ability of women to create life is a source of power that historically through the ages has been a reason to control the patriarchy to control because it is so powerful. I would also say this was my original comment, going back to what Lysinka said, that I believe when it comes to what do we need to let go of, Joni's question, as women, we need to let go of fear. We need to let go of fear of what will happen if we truly embrace and then embody our authentic selves, which we now are being called to do. And so fear of rejection, fear of disapproval, fear of losing our jobs, fear of all of that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Lisinka, where do you think women can be supported in, pursuing a PhD, pursuing a graduate degree when fighting against this norm of not doing that?
That takes us back to the guiding principle that each of us has in us, that spark, following your joy, following your bliss, I think it was sometimes called. And I think that when in a school we are encouraged to follow our own bliss, there's a strength that comes up from the inside. There's like a spark that drives us. There's an interest that drives us ahead. And that is a very, very strong force within us. I think that is possibly the strongest impetus that can help us, much more so than somebody saying, "Oh yeah, you can do it, dear. Why don't you?" It's that inner force that we need to unleash in ourselves.
Lisinka, you've got me dancing in my seat. I wrote a whole book about this, and I call that spark mojo. That, that's really what we have to do, is stoke that inner fire. And I think one of the things we have to let go of is our whole idea of gender to begin with. Right now, it's incredibly fluid, probably more fluid than ever in history, gender identity. And so even as an identity, it's falling apart. And it creates a lot of division and boundaries that aren't really helpful, and that put a lot of constraints on women especially, but on everybody. And so I use yin and yang, the Taoist concepts, and it almost doesn't matter whether you see yin one way or yang one way, but they're polarities. And we tend to think of the masculine as more yang, the doing, the numbers, the more concrete things, the projects. And the yin, we've really disempowered over millennia by seeing some of these same factors that people have brought up, that a lot of what women tend to bring, the feminine tends to bring, is the deeper understanding, is even respecting that spark. It's not even a thing in highly yang dominant thinking. It's a thing for women, in feminine, in yin more thinking. And that's why I like taking it out of the domain of gender, because if we keep making it about gender, we end up with a bifurcation. We end up with the muddiness of, I'm somewhere in between these genders, so where do I fit? And we end up with all those questions that we need to find a way to rise beyond. And these assumptions about gender are so hardcore. And so we were kind of fighting our way out of a paper bag that we've put ourselves in with these gender norms. And so if we can move the language to say things more like yin and yang, we can bring the best of the yin into a person who may be identified for all kinds of cultural reasons as more yang, as typically male, but now we free up that space in the individual to bring them to a more holistic understanding of the human condition, which is we've all got all of it in us at all the time. And some of us express more yin-ward and express more yang-ward, but the cultural prejudices against the more yin factors of our reality are the assumptions that have gotten us into a tremendous amount of trouble. Bonita, I see your hand up, and I'd like to throw it back to you, Youssef, for a moment and get some of your feedback. Youssef?
I think we would like to hear Bonita first. It would be good because she had her hand up.
Sure.
Well, thank you. And I specifically, Joni, thank you very much for your articulation, what you just said, because that's specifically why I decided to identify the individualistic competencies and the relational competencies, so that I'm not naming them masculine and feminine, that they can live and need to be identified with whoever is actually utilizing them and expressing them. For instance, I had a student from China come up to me. He had been in my class the quarter before, and he came up to me and he said, I used to think I was weird, and now I know I'm relational. because
which is more yin.
yes, yes. And to be able to have this language that's not associated absolutely with masculine and feminine, but to be able to identify the competency and being able to validate it and make it valid for men as well as women and the whole spectrum of gender, then we can bring these, what I call the relational competencies, forward. And for instance, the difference between either or thinking and both and thinking. And this is what both and, this is my both and thinking. The difference between, for instance, customer focused, in individualistic terms, it's I'm the expert, I know what's best for the customer. In relational mindset, it's I get into the shoes of the customer and look from there. And they're both important, but once you have to understand the differences, and certainly to be able to value the relational, which has been invisible, unarticulated, and even misinterpreted as being incompetent. As I said before, it was Carol Bartz was second in command at Sun Microsystems when I did my original research, when they were one of the top tech companies in the world. And she was the one that identified that she had she liked to prevent fires, that the men for the most part would prioritize and take the highest priority problem, the highest priority solution, put the solution against the problem and fight any fires that happen. She said, I like to prevent fires, but for this, I'm considered to be not a team player. And that's when, I identified from the executives that they were seeing women as being scattered and all over the place. And also she was getting into other people's turfs. She was head of worldwide operations, but she was getting into finance and to R&D and human resources. So that's what I mean by identifying these relational competencies and putting language to them. And for instance, creating a win-win environment rather than competitive. In fact, I also wanted to address the education piece about I myself did not want to get an advanced degree because I didn't want to go through the meat grinder. And I worked for 3 different transformational education companies that gave me the wherewithal to create my language and my approach to understanding differences and creating collaboration. And here I am teaching in the graduate engineering department.
Thank you.
So I'll turn it over from here. But I do want to say that the transformation of education is also an important part of this. And I am seeing this beginning to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Youssef.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the contribution that reminded us that transformation starts from the inside. This is critical. And the example that were given were very, very compelling. Thank you also for Bonita mentioning the importance of education. Education is one of those few human endeavors that are expected to prepare us for the future. And yet, unfortunately, they tether us to the current system and the current sort of moorings of control. And so my question, just to advance a little bit the dialogue that I'd like to reiterate at this stage, doesn't mean we can't go back to the other question, is, are there signs in the present? Are there initiatives? Are there some creative movements, some transformative movements taking place in any field, political, educational, that you believe are gesturing towards that unitive future? that we need to be aware of, that can be harnessed to bring that unitive future closer to the present. And so that enables us to liberate us from just bemoaning what is not working, lamenting what is wrong with the current present, but actually what can be strong, that can be harnessed, either in our relational life or our relations between a human and nature, that you think are moving towards that unitive consciousness. I would welcome any examples that you can share. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't know if I can go.
Sure.
All right. So I can just give some few examples from Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone is a patriarchal society where men dominate even in terms of participation and decision making. And my organization, Campaign for Good Governance, changing that narrative has been our key focus, because we want a future where women, men, boys, and girls will be seen as equals and as well governed the same opportunity, so that at least we can have a society that says no to any form of discrimination. So we had a 11-year civil conflict, which I guess you might be aware of. And one of the key recommendations after the conflict was there was what we refer to as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report. And one of the findings of the report was that marginalization, discrimination was eminent before the conflict and was seen as one of the causes of the Sierra Leone civil conflict. And there was a recommendation that if we are to address that, conscious efforts should be made so that at least we can have a situation wherein we have women participating in decision making, so that women are not only seen, but they are also heard and given the opportunity. So we collaborated with a government to see how best at least we can have a gender law, a gender policy. So in 2020, that policy was launched and it was chaired by the Executive Director of Campaign for Good Governance. So we saw that as a start towards addressing the long gender inequality that had existed in Sierra Leone. So fast forward, we said, okay, having the law is not enough. Sorry, having the policy is not enough. We need a law. So we pushed for the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act together with government, and that was passed in 2022. The push for that was because 2023 was the election. So that at least we wanted to see a situation wherein we could do an assessment in terms of the implementation. So in 2028, for instance, we only had 12 female parliamentarians. So you see the majority, only like a 12% of 12% women that were in parliament. And you know, parliament is a key decision-making position. So we wanted to change that. So with the passing of the law, we now have 28% women, from 12 to 28%. Then from 5% ministers, we now have 34 cabinet female ministers in Sierra Leone. So you see that this is a huge progress compared to what existed. And so we are pushing again as an organization together with other partners, now that we're working on the constitutional review process, to see how best at least we can have some of these things embedded in the constitution, and because the constitution is like the ground norm. So we see this as hope in terms of addressing gender equality, especially talking about participation in politics and in decision-making processes, that if we can now have 34% women ministers, And also we can have 34% of female counselors. We think that is key. And what we are now doing as an organization is how do we sustain this number? How do we get these people productive is key to us. Hence the reason why my organization Campaign for Good Governance, immediately they were elected. This is the first time in history from 1961. This is the first time we're having this number of women in this decision-making position. So we've provided training to the ministers so that they can deliver and they can be seen by other women as example, so that at least we can be able to maintain that. We'll also train the parliamentarian and we'll form them into a formidable group so that at least they can advance issues relating to women's empowerment as such. So we are gradually moving, and we believe that we're able to achieve a situation wherein we have 50-50, both men and women seeing themselves as equals in development.
Wonderful. David?
As you also mentioned, Youssef, in just in terms of experiential relationship, and there you go. And just for an example that just comes to mind is with Hezekiah and I. I am president of Pathways to Peace, and Hezekiah is the executive director of Pathways to Peace. And we just do our work and we do our presentations and we do what we do just in a flow. There's no, from my experience, there's no dynamic or issue or male female other than we are two people with the strengths that we have and the mutual support that we have. So you go to, well, why is that? Where does this come from? Well, I guess you go back to, our upbringing and our spiritual selves and where it comes together. But it's a wonderful collaboration continually. So what could be done with this? And I think that, so again, we go back to so much of what we're talking about is about life experience, is about mindset, but how do we make a shift in that? And this, I think it's by example, it's by education, it's by inspiration to others, particularly younger people, because they can see their lives differently. We're all based upon, our society but it, just change. So what would we do? I don't know. Tosca and I would go on the road and sit around and be people. But anyhow, it happens, but it's kind of like, well, why is that? Would be a question. So just one as an example.
I'm spotlighted, so I think that means I'm supposed to say something. So, yes, it is absolutely divine to be able to transcend typical or traditional sex role stereotypes and not to even think about whether I'm bringing the feminine perspective or the masculine perspective. Instead, it's that we are bringing a unitive perspective to the work that doesn't need to be defined by gender. And it's powerful. I'm grateful for it. And I think it's where we are at as a planet, that we see women are rising around the world. And that's an important physical form-based transition. But really, it is about us embodying and embracing our true authentic natures, who we are as individuals, so that we can truly fulfill our purpose here. And so shedding those traditional roles, or even allowing those to kind of to interfere, I'll say, in who we are and what we bring is a waste of time and energy. And again, it goes back to what I said earlier. Yes, we need to push past our fear of what it means to truly bring our authentic selves to the planet right now when it is needed more than ever. So again, acknowledging that we are one, acknowledging the importance of that unitive consciousness, that unitive mindset, that unitive approach is so significant to be able to transcend what, in light of that, feels like silly differences, to be able to do our work together.
Thank you. And I'm just posting some links here. The first one is to the unitive narrative. Scott just referred to that in his message in the chat. And this is based largely on Jude Caravan's work, who's with us today. Really, this lays out how we are indeed one. Not hopefully, but indeed existentially one. Also, last year for CSW, we did a whole side event on using the yin-yang lens to transcend gender bifurcation. And that was with a physicist who Will Keepin, who had some really interesting things to say about that. So yes, it is both them thinking. And Scott? Scott, I see your hand up.
I'm unmuted now. Thank you. And you can turn that video on, or I don't know if I can.
You can.
Okay, there we go. Hello to all. Wonderful session. Hope everybody's enjoying it as much as I am. Thank you, Tez, for your comments. A little qualifier, though. So Tez just shared that we need to push past our fears. Might I suggest that we create a new, I'll use the word that I chatted with, sanctuary. Let's create a sanctuary for our fears. And let's enter into deep relationship with our fears. Let's honor our fears, since I carry many fears. I carry a whole satchel of fears with me every day. Let's create a new, context for how we relate to our fears. Our fears are indicators of things that are of concern to us. So to also reference my comment on deep listening, let's do some deep listening, some deep breathing with our fears. Let's be warriors with our fears. Let's certainly release our fears. But I think, in terms of this transformed relationship and doing so in a very gender conscious way, fear is a portal. If we're looking for portals of change, let's choose fear as one of those portals. We're all struggling with fears, but I think we can be revolutionaries about how we think about and feel through this current moment. Thank you.
Yeah. Course in Miracles says there's fear and love. That's the only two real emotions in the world. And fear is certainly the portal into more lovingness. So, yes, Scott, thank you. Youssef, I want to throw it back to you.
Thank you very much, Scott, Tez, and David. I think these are excellent examples of collaborative change from inside out. I like particularly the use of fear as a portal for transformation. I just wish to give you an example of what I see, and please feel free to comment, to take exception. As Ruth Currivan has often stated, the world we're living in is the result of a dis-ease of separation. It's the sort of scourge of separation, all kind of levels of separation. The one area of separation that has seen some transformation recently, that gestures to our unitive consciousness, is towards reducing or ending the separation between the human and nature. So I'll give one example. As you are familiar, one of the areas that is not often talked about in the United Nations because it is outside the sphere of the state-centric policies is the agenda of a General Assembly agenda called harmony with nature, that men and nature are one. And as a result of that, through various resolutions and policy discussions, we have seen increasingly nations according or giving or attributing legal personhood to mountains, to rivers, to forests. It's not something new. Indigenous culture and indigenous wisdom have considered that we are part of nature. And so the most recent is a law enacted in New Zealand, given legal rights to a particular mountain, the name of which has escaped me. And so when I said, could you identify developments, innovations that can be harnessed to overcome this gender norms, I was thinking of that example where nature has right and where we're no longer talking about human-centered and nature-centered. We just one nature. So that's example of I wanted to mention as an indication of this unitive trend that we are one. Nature is not outside us. We are nature. So that's just one way of illustrating what I was trying to elicit in terms of responses, in addition to the responses we have heard in the area of governance and education. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? I'm going to open the floor. These are times where thinking this way is really providing a bridge. We know that leadership really now needs to be bridge walkers. You can't lead in the old paradigm and think we're going to get someplace different. And so leaders right now need to have that warrior consciousness. And when you said warrior, it took me back to the samurai warrior. And the whole yin and yang idea is the samurai trained in calligraphy. They trained in poetry. They trained in flower arranging. They trained in as many or more yin type things that we call feminine today, but I want to take us out of that stuck nomenclature, that bifurcation, and say they trained in the yin dynamics as well as in the martial arts, the more yang arts. And so that is the warrior, and the warrior is having so much equanimity within the self, and this is where the personal development comes in, so much equanimity within the self that they have the full consciousness to choose to go more yinward or to go more yangward in their response to a situation. And that's really part of what we're talking about right now, is moving out of reaction and into response. And response is building the culture we want to see. Reacting is pushing against the bad culture that we want to keep pushing against. And then everything becomes defined and enwrapped in this culture that we are all in agreement. It's not working. And even wonderful declarations aren't taking us out of it. And so it's conversations like these that we want to dilate the space to have a different conversation, to have a conversation for other possibility. And that's part of that warrior archetype, is walking into the unknown in complete equanimity, ready to go soft and listening and staying quiet and still and managing whatever emotions come up, or going in fully present with full steam ahead. There's a time for to be more yin, there's a time to be more yang. And by the way, there's no such thing as balance, because when you breathe in, you're more yang, and when you breathe out, you're more yin. And so if you were to stop and be absolutely imbalanced, you'd have to die right then and there, because the nature of the human condition is that it's always changing. That's the Tao in Taoism. It's always changing. And so the warrior rides those changes, surfs the wave with equanimity. And it's that internal equanimity that folks are pointing to. And the work now is to get that kind of equanimity into our idea of leadership, into our idea of what constitutes healthy culture, into our ideas of policy making. We're coming up to the end, and Youssef, I'd like to give you the final thoughts here.
Thank you very much, Joni. I think you brought a very important element that I wish to share one reflection on as we get closer to the end, and that's the issue of leadership. We are living in a period where something is under stress and is no longer serving us and is ending. And that particular system that is ending is really fighting back to remain relevant, and keep us in the solutionism we are tethered to, so it can survive, it can extend its expiration date. And the idea that if we want to be the architect of the future instead of the victims of the present that we are lamenting, we need to start from a unifying idea. When we start with the futures, we can lead when we don't know where we're going. So the future become the starting point. And for this discussion, we're using a future that is unitive. And so that is the challenge of us. And this is called leadership in liminal space. Leadership between something that is no longer serving us and something that is awaiting to emerge. And so if we want to lead from the emerging future, we need to imagine what we've always been, which is we're all one. And then walk our way to the present and say, what are the things we need to change? What are the assumptions we need to question that have tethered us to a paradigm that no longer serves us? And what are some of the innovations, some of the imaginative things that are taking place that we can latch on, that we can harness to bring that unitive future to the present and collectively work on it? So leadership is critical. This liminal unitive leadership is critical to take us from what is to what if, from what no longer serves us and dividing us and controlling us to something that unites us. So that's the value of futures back thinking. Is that it liberates us to work from inside out to what unites us, let what no longer serves us, and walk towards that unitive future. So leadership is critical in these times. Otherwise, we'd be stuck with the usual state-centric declaration similar to the one that just been adopted, where the basis is the political consensus, the lowest common denominator of what can be tolerated. That's not what should be the starting point leading towards the future. It should be the future walking back. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And that's really, you just said it so perfectly what the Unitive Cluster is in business to do. We exist under the NGO major group for the purpose of providing exactly that unitive basis, no longer that consensus from the past that binds us, but really standing in the field of unity, which is the field of all potential, and making our interventions from there. And if you are a UN NGO, you are most welcome to join us. We meet on the second Friday of every month. And this is I'm going to put up in the chat, this is our webpage. We'll give you a good sense of who we are. And Tara, if you are able to put the email address in the chat. So if you want to be in touch with us, that would be great. And I am going to put the Zoom room where we have every Friday's meetings. And these are 12:30, second Friday of every month. And that's 12:30 ET. So we welcome you to join us. We work solely on intervening in UN processes from this perspective, from the unitive perspective, building a unitive basis for responding into the international system, for transforming the UN's work and how it approaches that work, and for finding the strength with one another to stand on this ground together, because the ground is solid. It's just nobody's standing here. We've all been standing in this very shaky, untrue ground, the ground that says we're separate and divided and that men and women have to do things differently and conflict, and all of the nonsense that goes with the old paradigm that no longer serves and that is crumbling under our feet and is not fit for the purpose of human survival. And so we would really invite you to come along. And Scott also just put something in the chat. Thank you so much, Scott, for doing that. We have drafted a letter to the Secretary General to advocate for a culture of peace. And that is a big part of the Unitive Cluster's work, is developing culture of peace work within the UN. So the next meeting is the second Friday, is actually today at 12:30, because today is the second Friday of March. And the one after that, if someone can look at the calendar, put the second Friday of April's date in there. And again, this is open to UN NGOs only, to people with boots on the ground at the UN. And you are most welcome, and we appreciate so much you being here today and staying through. And to those of you who came at the end, it was great to have you here. Thank you, Youssef, Mahmoud. Your brilliance is such an inspiration and much appreciated. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Wonderful.